Police officer humiliates elderly teacher. Then the army general arrives and says, "Hi, Mum. Welcome back and enjoy the story." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the linoleum floor of the Chicago police station. Clara Matthews clutched her worn leather handbag tighter, her arthritic fingers tracing the brass clasp that had lost its shine decades ago. At 72, her spine curved forward from years of bending over children's desks, and her floral dress hung loosely on her diminished frame. The station's cold air bit through the thin fabric, but she straightened her shoulders and approached the reception counter with quiet determination. Inside her purse, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a faded photograph of a young man in military dress, her son, her pride, her only remaining family. Officer Brent Kowalski barely glanced up from his paperwork when the elderly woman shuffled toward his desk. His broad shoulders strained against his uniform shirt, and irritation creased his weathered face. The morning had already brought 3 domestic disputes, a bar fight and now this. Another senior citizen probably complaining about neighborhood kids or lost cats. He drummed his thick fingers against the desk, the sound echoing in the sterile lobby like bullets in a chamber. When Clara finally reached the counter, he didn't bother hiding his annoyance. "What is it now?" he barked, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "This isn't a social services office, lady." Clara's gentle voice trembled slightly as she explained the break-in at her modest bungalow on Maple Street. Someone had entered through her kitchen window while she slept, stealing her late husband's military medals and war memorabilia, precious remnants of a man who had served his country with honor. But Officer Kowalski wasn't listening. He rolled his eyes dramatically and leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking under his weight. "Let me guess," he interrupted with a cruel smirk. "They also stole your knitting needles and your romance novels?" Several younger officers within earshot chuckled, their laughter sharp and mocking in the echoing space. The humiliation deepened as Kowalski stood and towered over Clara, his shadow falling across her like a dark cloud. "Maybe you just forgot where you put your husband's junk," he sneered, his breath reeking of coffee and contempt. "Or maybe you're one of those attention-seeking old bats who makes up stories to feel important." His words struck Clara like physical blows, each syllable designed to wound and diminish. The other officers exchanged glances but remained silent, complicit in their colleagues' cruelty. Then, in a moment that would haunt the station for years to come, Kowalski gathered saliva in his mouth and spat near Clara's feet, the glob landing dangerously close to her worn brown shoes. The lobby fell into stunned silence, the only sound the persistent buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Would anyone dare to witness such brazen disrespect toward an elderly citizen seeking help from those sworn to protect and serve? Clara stared down at the spittle near her shoes, her dignity pooling on the cold floor like spilled water. Her hands shook, not from age this time, but from the shock of such deliberate cruelty. She had taught elementary school for 40 years, shaping young minds and nurturing countless children through their formative years. She had faced difficult parents, challenging students and budget cuts that threatened her classroom supplies, but never in all those decades of service had anyone treated her with such naked contempt. "You shouldn't speak to people that way," she whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying the weight of decades of moral authority. Kowalski laughed harshly. "Or what, Grandma? You going to tell the principal?" The cruelty in his voice was matched only by the silence of his colleagues, who watched this degradation unfold without intervention. As Clara walked slowly toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the hollow space, she felt the weight of every year pressing down on her shoulders. The photograph in her purse seemed heavier now, a reminder of the son who had grown up believing in justice and honor, values she had instilled in him through bedtime stories about heroes and everyday acts of courage. Outside, the Chicago wind whipped through the streets, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of change. She sat on a bench across from the station, watching the flow of uniformed officers entering and leaving, wondering if her late husband Robert would have recognized the institution he had once respected. The medals stolen from her home represented more than military service. They were symbols of sacrifice, duty, and the belief that some things were worth protecting. Have you ever experienced or witnessed someone being treated with such disrespect, simply because of their age or perceived vulnerability? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. An hour later, the mundane rhythm of the police station shattered like glass against concrete. Black SUVs with tinted windows formed a convoy outside, their engines purring with quiet authority. Officers throughout the building straightened their uniforms and adjusted their postures as word spread quickly through the ranks. Someone important was arriving. Chief Martinez emerged from his office, hastily tucking in his shirt and smoothing his graying hair. Through the large windows, the silhouette of a figure in military dress uniform became visible, stepping from the lead vehicle with practiced precision. The lobby, which had buzzed with casual conversation moments before, fell into respectful silence as the automatic doors slid open to admit their unexpected visitor. General Samuel Matthews entered the Chicago police station with the bearing of a man accustomed to command. His uniform was immaculate, adorned with ribbons and medals that caught the harsh fluorescent light and transformed it into something noble. At 6 feet 3 inches, his presence filled the space, commanding attention without demanding it. His grey hair was cropped military short, and his steel blue eyes swept the room with the analytical gaze of someone trained to assess situations quickly and accurately. Officers who had been lounging against walls suddenly found urgent business elsewhere, while others stood straighter, their casual demeanor replaced by nervous professionalism. Even Officer Kowalski, who had been regaling a colleague with crude jokes, fell silent and attempted to blend into the background. The general's eyes moved methodically across the lobby until they found their target, a small elderly woman sitting quietly on a bench near the community bulletin board. Clara had returned to collect a police report number, a bureaucratic necessity, for her insurance claim. When their eyes met, something extraordinary happened to this decorated military officer who had commanded troops in 2 theaters of war. His stern expression melted away, replaced by a tenderness that transformed his entire countenance. "Mom," he said, his deep voice carrying across the silent lobby with unmistakable warmth and concern. The single word hung in the air like a revelation, causing gasps and murmurs throughout the room as officers tried to process what they were witnessing. Clara's weathered face brightened with recognition and disbelief. "Samuel, my Samuel," she whispered, rising unsteadily from the bench as tears welled in her eyes. Without hesitation, the general crossed the distance between them and dropped to one knee before his mother, taking her trembling hands in his strong, steady ones. The sight of this powerful military leader kneeling before an elderly woman created a tableau that burned itself into the memory of everyone present. "Are you all right, Mom? What happened here?" His voice carried the authority of command, but also the tender concern of a son who had never stopped being his mother's little boy. Officer Kowalski, who moments before had been invisible in the crowd, now felt every eye in the room searching for him. The transformation in the station's atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Officers who had witnessed Clara's earlier humiliation now understood the magnitude of their collective failure. Chief Martinez approached cautiously, his face pale with the realization that his department had grievously mistreated the mother of one of the state's highest-ranking military officials. But more than that, they had failed in their basic duty to serve and protect all citizens with dignity and respect. General Matthews helped his mother to her feet, his movements gentle but his eyes scanning the room with tactical precision. "Who was responsible for my mother's treatment?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an undertone that made several officers shift uncomfortably. The question wasn't shouted or aggressive, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Clara placed a restraining hand on her son's arm, her touch gentle but firm. "Samuel, please," she said softly. "There's no need for drama. It was just a misunderstanding." But the general's training had taught him to read situations clearly, and he could see the residual hurt in his mother's eyes, the slight tremor in her voice that spoke of recent trauma. He had spent his career protecting American values and freedoms, and to discover that his own mother had been denied basic human dignity in a place sworn to uphold justice cut him to his core. Officer Kowalski finally stepped forward, his earlier bravado completely evaporated, replaced by the pale realization of his catastrophic error in judgment. His uniform, which he had worn with such swagger earlier, now felt like a costume he had no right to display. The general's response was measured but devastating in its quiet intensity. He didn't raise his voice or make threats. Instead, he spoke with the calm authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Officer," he said, addressing Kowalski directly, "if my mother had been anyone else, a teacher, a nurse, a grandmother seeking help, would your behavior have been acceptable?" The question hung in the air like an indictment, forcing everyone present to confront the ugly truth about institutional prejudice and the failure of basic human decency. Kowalski's attempt to stammer an explanation died in his throat as the general continued. "My mother spent 40 years teaching children to read, to dream, to believe in justice and fairness. She shaped the minds of future leaders, doctors, teachers, and yes, even police officers, and today she came here seeking help and was met with contempt." That evening, in the modest living room of Clara's bungalow on Maple Street, mother and son sat together as they had countless times throughout his childhood. The space was filled with memories, photographs of Samuel's military career, Robert's medals, now replaced through official channels, and the accumulated treasures of a life spent in service to others. Samuel had changed from his formal uniform into a comfortable sweater, but the conversation between them carried the weight of the day's revelations. "I never wanted to cause trouble," Clara said quietly, cradling a cup of tea in her hands. "I just wanted someone to listen, to care enough to write down what happened." Samuel reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hand. "You didn't cause any trouble, Mum. You revealed it." The following morning brought unexpected visitors to Clara's front door. Chief Martinez arrived personally, accompanied by a formal letter of apology signed by every officer in the department. The document was more than bureaucratic damage control. It represented a genuine acknowledgement of failure and a commitment to change. Officer Kowalski's signature appeared at the bottom, accompanied by a handwritten note that simply read, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." Clara accepted the apology with grace, because that was who she was, a woman who understood that redemption required forgiveness, and that true strength lay not in holding grudges but in hoping for better from humanity. Samuel watched his mother's response with quiet pride, reminded once again that the values she had taught him extended far beyond military honor to encompass the deeper courage of compassion. In the weeks that followed, the Chicago police station underwent changes that rippled through every aspect of its operation. Officer Kowalski was suspended pending retraining, not as punishment, but as an opportunity for genuine growth and reflection. The incident became a case study in police academies throughout the state, a stark reminder that the uniform carries with it not just authority, but responsibility to every citizen, regardless of age, status, or apparent importance. Clara returned to her quiet life, tending her garden and reading to children at the local library. But something fundamental had shifted in the community's relationship with those sworn to protect and serve. The story of the teacher and the general became a legend whispered in precincts across the nation, a reminder that true honor cannot be worn on a sleeve, but must be carried in the heart. Congratulations. Type 7 in the comments, so I know you stayed with me until the end. Leave a like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. See you.